Hey, I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of Grace Grit and Grounds. If you've been with us in our channel for a while, you know that occasionally I have guests on, and today is no different. I have a wonderful guest with me. And you'll probably notice that I don't have my traditional coffee cup. I know that I like grounds, and part of the story, when I came up with the channel name, I wanted something that was me, right? And so I came up with Grace because I love the concept of grace. I love the concept of grit. We talked about that cowboy up, get up and make it happen, get her done kind of mentality that I think as Christians and as ministers, that needs to be who we are because we don't really have the drive behind us making us do these things, right? And so we need to have that perseverance, that grit. And grounds was originally I wanted to bring it up because I love coffee, but then I started thinking about it. It's not just grounds, but one of the subtitles I've used in the past on other shows, other parts of the same channel, was grounded theology for life. And so grounds is a two-parter. It's coffee grounds and grounded theology.
I thought you were going to go with holy ground.
Holy ground. Yes, I like
so
that.
You'd have holy,
but
yes.
I don't want to go that far because I'm not Moses. And I think I think that would be like serious hubris for me to jump in those shoes. Like take your shoes off. You're standing in Al's office. It's holy ground. We don't want that to happen. So anyway, for those that don't know my guest, this is Chris Field. For those that you need to Google him, that's Field without an S because he's not Fields. He's not multiple fields. He's a single, solitary, major, awesome field. Like build it and it will come. The field of dreams, if you will. So it's hard.
No pressure.
I know pressure, right? Yeah. So I know sometimes we do things like this, try to have a little fun. For those that know us, Chris is a member of our church, and he's also a good friend, and he's a fellow minister. And so, like I said, for the folks that don't know you, because we've got people that watch this channel all over, I'm hoping you give us a chance to tell us a little bit about your journey. Now, I know that you had been a senior pastor once, briefly, for a few years, and you now work a full-time secular job.
That's right.
I love the idea of secular job, and I've talked about this a little bit, but not much on my channel, because I think it's important for people to know there's no such thing as a sacred and a secular job as a separation. They're both the same because we all have a calling.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter what you do. If you're called to be a doctor, that's as sacred as being a pastor. And we try to make this as something special, and it's not. It's just different. It may be a higher calling in some areas, but it's at the end of the day, it's still a calling. And we know that God is. That's right.
Yep. Called to be a priesthood wherever we are, right? To deliver that message. Yep.
Yeah, I love it. And now you use that secular job as a platform to fund your family, your life, and everything else. And then from there, you're able to work as an interim. You've done work as a pulpit supply, and shortly you and I are going to be teaching a seminar to churches on church strengthening. So we're actually taking it to the next level. We're not just doing local pastor work to help churches be stronger. We're now hoping to help pastors be stronger.
Yes.
For their churches. So I like this new era we're in. So tell us a little about yourself and how you got here.
Yeah. I'm going to rewind back even before the pastorate part.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I'm not traditionally trained as a pastor. So if we go back where Jamie and I, my lovely wife, got married and moved immediately to Nashville, Tennessee.
I love.
Oh yeah,
great state of Tennessee.
That's right. We moved down there, and so newly married, we're separated from our family really, and it really caused us to rely on each other. In a lot of ways, that strengthened us, but it was also challenging. And the reason I'm bringing that up is we were down there for about 2.5 years, and I worked for the FDIC as a bank examiner, and I traveled all over. And I was what I would refer to as a casual Christian, right? God was that cosmic vending machine for me, where when I needed something, I'd push the button and expect it to pop out, and I get what I need. So I believe, but I wasn't active in my faith, in all honesty. And so when my older son was born, I'd been on the road, and one of the senior examiners said, well, make sure you get a picture of your son because you're not going to see him much. Because we traveled that much, right? I was on the road probably 75% of the time. And I decided that's not what I wanted to do. And that's where God really, he'd been talking to me. That's where I finally started to listen. And I remember vividly one day being in the driveway of our house that we had down in Smyrna, Tennessee, and just looking up, and it's like, God, I can't do this. I need help. I wanted to be able to move back to Northern Kentucky, to be back closer to family, to do these things.
'Cause you
And
were born and raised here.
oh yeah, absolutely. Went to Campbell County High School, born in Rewright in Alexandria. And so that was our sojourn was away, right, to Tennessee. And we just both wanted to get back home. And I realized I couldn't. This was before internet was a big thing. I'm getting the newspapers and I'm looking for jobs, and there's a whole story there. But long story short, that's God started moving mightily in my life when I finally made that acknowledgement, and he put me on a fast track and just moved certain things. And one coincidence after another would happen. Right there, God events happened and got us back to Northern Kentucky, got me back into my home church, and hooked me up with some godly men. And just, I started diving deeper and deeper.
Mm.
Fast forward that a few years, and had opportunity to just fill the pulpit for a small church in the area. And I'd never preached a sermon in my life, ever. I was a deacon, right? I that was it. And so had that opportunity to fill in the pulpit there, thinking it was going to be a one and done. Needless to say, God's not it. If you ever put out there that you're going to help for something, one of God's plans, right? Because this was like, hey, let me know if I can help in this pastoral search thing that my wife's aunt was a part of.
Right.
I didn't mean it.
No, I do that all the time. You're like, hey, if you ever give me a call, but you don't ever want them to.
No, right. It
No,
was one of those,
it
it was a
wasn't.
throwaway line. You're being polite. And God said, oh, you said it. And so I wound up filling the pulpit once and then a second time. And then, oh, by the way, you became the interim. And then that led to becoming a pastor. So I've never been to seminary. I've not had that traditional background. And so a lot of my passion for what you were talking about, being there for pastors, comes out of that.
Yeah.
Because I was so unprepared in so many ways. And I was passionate. I had a desire. God honored that. But then it was God who carried me through, right? It wasn't my own strength. It was God totally doing it. And it was a rough season.
Wow.
Being there.
You know my story. We've talked quite a bit, and I've transitioned from churches. I've been senior pastor in a bunch of churches, and before that, I was an associate pastor in about 3 or 4. And so, for a while there, we were transitioning every 3 years, 3 or 4 years, which was fitting my military background with my family. My dad was Navy, my wife was Navy, so the idea of moving every few years was something ingrained in my mind. But it was tough, and so making that transition away is hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that. And I know we've talked about your transition. That was not easy.
Yeah.
But you weren't moving. So whenever I transition, I leave. I leave the city. I go somewhere completely different. You're born and raised here. Your plan was to come back here, not ever leave here again.
Right.
So, and then you're no longer in that church. I mean, man, that's gotta be tough.
It was, and I really struggled with a lot of things. I struggled with feeling like I'd failed,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
That I'd failed God, I'd failed my family. And it was hard. And it took the next pastor who followed me reaching out and telling me that I hadn't failed. And that meant the world to me.
Yeah.
And had experienced some challenges of his own. But
you feel free to tell us who that pastor was.
Terry Wilder.
Terry Wilder.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Terry Wilder is listening to this.
That's right.
Thank you.
Yeah. and it just meant the world to me. And to know, right, just that I didn't fail, right? It was, no, I made my mistakes. But that just meant a lot to me and helped me heal and recover and move forward. And then from there, God honored my decision to go to that church, because I left that secular world to do that. And then I boomerang back into the secular world after that.
Yeah.
And, the interview I had is That was the one job I interviewed for, got it, and I've been there ever since. So we're going on 24 years now, I think.
Wow. Yeah.
And God has given me opportunity from that position then to do the things you talked about, to be able to be an interim, to fill the pulpit here and there. And I'll be honest, I find that extremely freeing to be able, because one of the things that really scared me, and I've talked about before, is right, they're paying your salary,
Yes.
right? And I've got 2 children and a wife, and how far do you rock that boat?
Yes. You got a mortgage payment, you got a car payment,
And
Hard.
and we shouldn't operate from that place, but that humanness, you do, right? There's a sense of responsibility.
Yeah.
So not having that, being able to come into a church and say, hey, I'm here to love on you, to support you, but to speak truth into a situation. And if you don't want to hear what I have to say, that's fine. You can tell me there's the door, and I'm out that door, and I'm fine with that. But to be able to speak into that without having that hanging over you, that sort of Damocles hanging over your head, is just, is very freeing. And I find I've been probably more effective in that role than being a senior pastor. Again, and discipleship just means so much to me. And it's a lot of what I do in the corporate world. When I got back, and I started teaching classes on how to use the software for the company I work for in that transit, because I love those light bulb moments. So being able to come into a church to share thoughts, share insights, and to see it when people start getting
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
I
I
love it.
love that too. There's nothing better
Yeah.
than to when you're preaching a message and having that aha moment
Yes.
where you see it. And maybe not everybody, but even just 1 or 2 people in
Yep.
the congregation, like,
Yep.
oh, you moved the needle a little bit. You got
Yes.
it. Yeah, it is a neat thing. I wanted to sort of pull back just a little bit to your time. Now, you left your church, and look, I had a first church, and not every pastor's like this, but many of the pastors I've known over the
Mm-hmm.
years, have had that first church experience that was just absolutely a nightmare. And part of it is we're still learning how to be a leader.
Yep.
They're learning how to let you lead, and sometimes it's not a good fit, and it's just a struggle. And at my first church, I made a ton of mistakes, and I look back on it, I'm like, why did I do that? That was the stupidest thing. And it wasn't going there wasn't stupid. It was me. I made the mistakes. Um, and they put up with me for long enough, and they finally said, this isn't working. And we separated. But um, it must have been tough for you after that time. And then you said Terry reached out to
Mm-hmm.
you and shared that with you. At what point did you make that decision to pivot back into a ministry role where you felt like you could have a voice in the church beyond just being a church member, maybe?
It was sort of a gradual thing, and it took a while to sort of recover and heal. And met with another group of folks. And what was really challenging is, from there, we went to a church, and I think like 2 Sundays in, we started getting connected with and that pastor announces he's resigning from the church because of turmoil within the. And I remember how I went outside. I literally got on my knees and wept, and I was just overwhelmed,
I bet.
and it was just like it was following us.
Yeah.
And so we kind of stayed with this group of folks for a while. Started a church actually on our own for a time, and it was good. But then things progressed, and Gary Wilson was the pastor's name, and he decided it was time to move on. There were some health issues and other things, and so that sort of transitioned on. And then Jamie and I fell away from there, and we drifted for a bit, trying to find that church home and where we fit. And throughout all of that, I was able to preach some at the startup church that we had there, so I was able to fill in that role and kind of get there. But then after that, it just sort of it took a while, and I would get an occasional call, because there's the list,
There is the list.
the list, and so I was apparently still on that list and would get the occasional phone call.
It's surprising that there aren't. I mean, I didn't realize this till just recently. I started filling in a role at our own association as the moderator, and our director of missions is gone. So a lot of that's falling on me now to do some of this work. And we had a pastor in our sphere that had a heart attack and major problems and needed someone to fill in for him, and I got that list. And it's funny you're on that list, but it's and we do, but it's surprising too that there are precious few young enough pastors to have the energy to do this.
hmm
Most of the people on the list are they're retired pastors, and when you're retired, like your energy level for ministry work is diminished, and it wasn't easy to fill the pulpit for that individual that had the heart situation because I was looking for who do I have, and the list is very small.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway,
So
interesting.
I'd get the occasional phone call and have opportunity, but they were kind of few and far between. But I appreciated when I was able to do that. And then where we were before we came here to Christ Baptist, I was serving in a leadership role and working toward trying to bring health to the church. And it was sort of through that and then opportunities I had to preach at a few places here and there. It just started becoming more crystallized for me. And again, my passion for discipleship is what I realized from my time when I was doing the full-time pastor. So many of our churches are filled with lovely people who want to know more, but just I don't think we as the church in general have done a great job of discipling.
Yeah.
And we've got a lot of folks who know surface level, but how do we go deeper? And that's been my passion. Again, why it flows over from my time teaching the classes where I work and everything else. I want people to get a deeper, myself included, myself
Yeah.
chief among them. How do I go deeper? How do I have that better knowledge? And so being able to do that and trying to bring that to the previous place where we were, and then, just being able to step into some other churches. And then as we were transitioning here to Christ Baptist, I actually had opportunity through that list to go to a small church, West Covington Baptist Church, lovely group of people. And I still get to go there on occasion when there's a need. And so I wasn't official interim, but I sort of served in that role
Yeah.
for a,
Because you were
for
there
a
like
period.
3 or 4 weeks at a time.
Yeah, I'd be
Yeah.
there for 3 or 4 weeks and then not, and then, while they were searching for their pastor. Um, and then, right, just that opportunity to speak into it over time and to see the challenges that face a lot of our small churches.
Yeah.
And going back to my own experience and realizing how do we do a better job of pulling these together, providing resources, helping the congregations, regardless of size, go deeper into the word, um, and just bringing that forward. So,
It's, to bounce off some of the things you're saying about discipleship, and I saw an article, or maybe it was a podcast. I don't know. The One of the heads of Southern Seminary is Al Mohler, and he does his own pod show. He's never asked me on his show, so probably because he doesn't know my name.
probably.
That's okay. But we do share that. We're both Al's, so maybe one day. I don't know, Al, if you're listening, I'm available. Just call me. No, I'm just kidding. He said something on one of his shows that really struck home to me, and he said that the history of the Baptist faith, from the we've been so people realize the Baptists have been a denominational faith for a little over 500 years. And in that history, as long as we've been keeping records, which isn't the whole 500, we've noticed that we are very good at evangelizing our own children,
hmm
but we are terrible at evangelizing people that didn't already have something connected to the Baptist world. And as a person who was a former Catholic Episcopalian who had no concept of Baptist theology, that suddenly found himself in a independent Baptist Christian school and hearing the gospel presentation for the first time coming to Christ, like I am one of those rare people that did come from the inside. But for the most part, all we end up doing is evangelizing our own.
hmm
And that's kind of scary when you think about it. And it occurred to me that right when I first started in ministry as an associate pastor, I was working with youth, and it occurred to me that as Baptists and as evangelicals, we are great at evangelizing. We shotgun the gospel out there. We don't care
hmm
who we hit, but we are terrible of raising those new children that we just gave birth to. It's like we give them the seeds of life.
Hmm.
We help them enter them into the kingdom of heaven, and then we just toss them out, newborn babes, into the wild and say, "Have at it. Watch out for those wolves. They can
Hmm.
be tough at night."
Yeah. Good luck.
Yeah, yeah. I'll talk to you next week. We don't do it. But yet, if you remember the Great Commission, it says, "Go ye therefore." I'm doing this in the King James. "Go ye therefore unto all the world, preach the gospel, and make
Yep.
disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit." Make disciples. We're not called to evangelize the lost. I mean, it's implied. The calling is to preach and make disciples. We suck at
We do. We do.
So what is your thoughts on that? I mean, I know I've just said a big thing, but I know we're of a similar mindset, but your practical experience is different from mine. What is it you're seeing in the churches that's similar to what I've seen,
Again, I don't have.
or dissimilar? Like
Yeah. So I don't have a vast amount of experience, but in the churches I've either been a member of, or I've supplied the pulpit, or had opportunity to preach at for extended periods of time. Um, it is there's a small group of people that will faithfully attend their Sunday school, or maybe it's a life group or small group, or
right,
whatever that is. Um, but as a whole, the congregation in at large, there tends to be a shallowness, and I'm not saying that to be mean.
yeah,
It's just the way that things have been set up. I think for a long time within our church systems, um, we arrive and we get our message on Sunday morning, and we think that's enough to sustain us. And I'm speaking my own experience for decades of my life. I did what I needed to do. I heard that, and I'll read my Bible maybe. Um, and that's where we say. And I think that's where a lot of our Christians today are. And if we go back and look at this scripturally, the book of Acts and beyond, that was not the experience. They met regularly. They had meals
study
together.
the word daily.
Yes, they
Yes,
studied the word on a regular basis. From the Old Testament into the New Testament, this was a serious matter that somewhere we've lost.
yeah.
That need to really understand what Scripture has to say, and it's for me, it was a eye opening.
Mhm.
And I even find right in the Sunday school class here, as I've been diving deeper for that, or more of the things that I've been doing there, I'm still uncovering things that I feel like I should have known years ago. And I often wonder, well, how did I miss it? How was I preaching if I didn't see this before? And God's grace is such that, you know, he carried me, like I said, but even there, it's like I'm never going to reach a full understanding, because if I do, then God isn't God,
Right.
right? I'm never going to fully grasp the entirety of Scripture this side of seeing Jesus. But there are things that it's like, wow, there is just some fundamental things that I see the threads of the Old Testament carrying through down to the New Testament so much, and I think that's a huge. I want to say this. I think we undervalue the Old Testament so much
Yeah.
in our churches today, because the New Testament is where it's at,
Yes.
right? That's where Jesus is. That's what we're here. It's all what we're all about. And I totally missed for the longest time that Jesus didn't come to do anything radical. Like he fulfilled the law of the Old Testament, right?
Right.
But that's what he preached.
Yes.
And we see, and there's so many instances of where Jesus is in the Old Testament when we stop and look.
Paul talks a little bit about that. In
Yes.
the Old Testament, it was viewed as a glass darkly, and then in the light of the New Testament, we see it more clearly. But
Yeah.
still, without the Holy Spirit, it's opaque and meaningless.
But to help people get to that
Yeah.
understanding, right? I did a sermon one time where I talked about that idea of our discipleship levels, right? And the idea of being an infant in to biological growth.
Yes.
And it's like we start as infants, then we hit that adolescent stage, and then those awkward teenage years, and then we hit maturity, and we have the same thing in our spiritual lives.
Oh,
But
so
the
we get
problem
stuck.
is we do. We often
Stuck.
get stuck at the infant level, maybe at the toddler into adolescence,
Yeah.
and that's where the vast majority of us stuck. And I'm not saying I'm all that in a bag of chips and I got it figured out, but it's that growth process, but we just tend to stop.
I was thinking about that. I love the analogy. Well, so Paul did too. Paul loved the analogy of using it. We've talked about this, the body
Yes.
as a reference. And so, with that same understanding, I think it's important that we can carry that same thing forward. Obviously, Paul thought it was good when we can use it too. And bodies grow, organisms grow. They have life cycles, and I do think it's important as a father of four, speaking to a father of two. I had three sons. You had two sons. In raising sons is different than raising daughters. We know
Mm-hmm.
that, and raising kids is difficult. I wonder in this idea, as you were talking, it hit me in this idea of like helping the discipleship process, like raising kids. Do you think that maybe the reason why we've drifted as a church over the decades, over the centuries, away from raising these spiritual infants into spiritual adults, it's because it's hard to raise kids?
Mm, absolutely. It takes effort and energy, and it takes a commitment. And I think on the surface, a lot of our churches too, we what are we after? And you and I have talked about it, right? How do we measure success?
Yes.
Right? You talked about it, the three B's,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
You know,
Butts, and baptism.
that's
That's
right.
how every church tries to do this. How much money you got in there, how
Yep.
many butts are in the seat, how many baptisms you had that year.
Right. And what does it take, in order for me to put money in a plate? Not a whole lot. I just have to agree to be part of the church and,
Easy.
and understand what it means to be a Christian. Got it. All right.
Right.
All right. I got baptized to get here, probably. So there we go. And I'm showing up and I'm sitting down.
Yep.
But how much we're absorbing when we focus on that with those three, and that's our metric of success.
It's a pretty low metric.
Right.
And Jesus said something about when he was ministering, he's talking about the blind leading the blind. And I know that metaphor has been taken and carried throughout our culture. And even if people don't know who said it, they know what that means. It's obvious a blind person can't lead another blind person. But I think sometimes what we look at in the current church is in the evangelistic model is we teach hard, we push hard to evangelize, share your faith, share your faith, share your
Mm-hmm.
faith. And what we end up having is spiritual infants birthing other spiritual infants and
Mm-hmm.
trying to help those spiritual infants that are newborn find food and sustenance, and they don't know where to give themselves. So that makes it really hard. And so now we have decades, maybe even a century of weak Christians that don't know their faith trying to help other people that are weak Christians.
I think that's valid because, right, that infrastructure, when it's not solid, then what would we expect?
Yeah.
And I think then, and as pastors, tying this back to the idea of how we support our pastors, we've got these men out there trying to do it all by themselves.
Yeah.
And they're often overworked and understaffed and not enough resources, especially in these smaller churches in our communities. And something else that really speaks to me is there are so many churches in our communities. And I'm going to say this, and I know I'm liable to get pushback. I think we have too many churches in our communities.
I would definitely tend to agree with you because that seems to be the Baptist model. I don't know other denominations because I've been a Baptist now for over 30 years. But yeah, our model is to plant new churches.
Yeah.
And that's what we do. We plant new churches.
And if you're planting it somewhere where the church doesn't already exist, that's fantastic.
Right.
But when we're planting a church when there's already a church within a mile and a half.
Now understand that it may not be a Baptist church.
Correct.
But if they're a point of where the gospel is
Yes.
being preached,
Yes.
whether they have Baptists on the door shouldn't matter.
Correct.
But for the Southern Baptists, like it's a big deal.
Yes.
If we don't have a Baptist church there, then we might not have a church home,
Right.
which is silly. But yeah,
And the thing is, and the problem is we start treating these other churches like the competition.
yes,
Right? They become we're competing. Well, they become they, right?
Yeah.
And not us.
right.
Because we talked about the body, Paul's idea of the body of Christ, and we look at that and we're good at taking that model within our own congregation and realizing, hey, Susie's the hand and Bobby's the foot and whatever. But when do we stop and look at the church universal, if you will, within our community and figure out how we all fit into that larger body of Christ? What role does this church serve in our community? And what role does that church serve in our community? And if all the churches are striving to be the same thing in that community, then we're doing the exact thing that Paul rebuked them for.
You got 20 left feet.
Exactly.
And nobody can walk.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree 100%. That's the big challenge. And Paul talks about it. He says that we're one body, we're one baptism, one spirit. We serve one Lord. Like we all are under the headship of Jesus Christ. And if we believe that the Holy Spirit is sovereign, then we ought to believe that he's sovereign enough to guide every single church, every single pastor the same
Yes.
way to meet the goal of building the kingdom. I think sometimes by the competitive mindset and
Hmm.
all of us trying to be left feet, that we are actually hindering and hurting the body of Christ,
Yes.
not building it up.
Yes.
And that ought to be that'd be a
It would be a totally other conversation, and I think there are times when it makes sense for some of our some of these churches to maybe come together and merge so they can be more powerful versus trying to maintain, being that other left foot when you've got another church within a stone's throw of you. How do you come together? How do you do? And if it's not merging, then how do you share resources, do things? And I think we don't do a good job of that, and that hinders our ability to create disciples as well, because we're constantly competing for. We're trying to, and when we're doing all that, our energy and our efforts aren't focused on the discipleship growth. They're focused on how do I get more butts in the seat.
right, right. And then it's about filling the metrics, not
Hmm.
actually building the kingdom.
Correct.
Yeah, I think Tom Rayner or one of the statisticians that the Christians love to pull to mentioned something about that none of the churches, I don't care how big they are hitting their demographic. So in church speak, they say that once a church hits 10% of their population density, like we are attracting into our building on a regular service, on average, 10% of our population density, that we are now saturating that community. I have not yet been in a church or know of a church that actually is reaching 10% of their demographic community that they're targeting. Even the mega churches aren't doing
Hmm.
that. And I think that's until we are all of us hitting that 10% mark, there's no competition. There's enough lost people to go around.
Oh yeah.
But we don't fight for the lost.
No, no, because oh dear. Because because it's easier,
It's
right?
easier to go after the sheep.
Oh, the instant
Yeah,
Christian, just
yeah.
add money.
You go to that sheep pen over there and says, "Hey, we've got a shinier sheep pen.
Yes.
We just put in a new water trough, and we've just got these nice shiny gates. And our gates are one of those where you can come and go. You're not trapped.
That's right.
So there it is.
That's right.
And we just lure them in with hay and good
Yes.
water.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. And it goes back to that, who are we growing through? Well, it's that this self-perpetuating, of our own families, our own group, and we're just shifting between,
it's a,
and we're not reaching out.
we're just sharing sheep.
Yeah,
We're not
that
actually.
that idea of going beyond the walls that
Yeah.
we're looking at, and we're just yeah, and I often tell to people if we're at an outreach event or something like that, hey, do you have a church? And if the answer is yes, then I'm done.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, good. Then
Yeah.
go be fruitful there. I'm not
Absolutely.
about stealing
That's it.
sheep. Right.
That's it.
I want you to be productive and fruitful where you are. Now, if you don't have a church home, let's talk.
Right.
Why do you not have a church home? Where are you? What is it? And now we can have a conversation. But I never want to try and lure somebody away from another congregation if it's a healthy environment that they're in.
My goal has always been that a believing Christian is in God's house, not the address that I happen to be in
Hmm.
at that Sunday on a Sunday morning. I don't care if it's the God's house that I am serving in or the one that's closer to your house or the one you have a greater connection with. I just want to see God's house full.
Hmm.
And I want to be full of God's people getting the healing, getting the training, getting the teaching they need so they can move beyond the walls
Hmm.
into that next step. And I know you brought that up, and we're going to go to the next part of our discussion, which is I'm really excited about. I'll be honest, I'm real nervous. I think we talked about that a little earlier today, but I'm a little nervous because we're going to be teaching, hopefully, pastors and church leaders, and I can talk to people that don't know the Bible as well as I do easily. I struggle when I'm in a room full of people that I believe knows everything I know, and they probably know it better than me. Like, how can I teach them anything? We want to get the church outside those walls. I had a British friend that joined my church in Belgium, and we had a conversation about missions. He said something to me that was really good. He said, if the church, if because again, I'm overseas doing this mission work, and he said that oftentimes we get the idea that missions, you have to go across the water to do missions.
Hmm.
And he said, he goes, I feel like I should dig a moat around the church so that every time somebody leaves the church, they cross bottom water, so they know that that's where their mission begins. I actually believe the mission doesn't just begin across outside the walls; it begins in the walls
Yes.
and moves outside. It's a ripple. Yeah. So, out of the core ideas that we've talked about, so it comes from a book I wrote and from my own experience in Belgium and then in Alaska, down here in Kentucky. That's Beyond the Walls. It's about community engagement. How do we take church leaders and give them the tools they can get out there? That's sort of the core ideas. I think in the end, we're really talking about discipleship.
Hmm.
And the sad part is, I feel like that our pastors need to be taught how to disciple, because I don't think our pastors know.
Yeah.
I know I didn't, and I don't remember a class in seminary. I went to seminary, you didn't. I don't remember a class in seminary that talked about how pastors could be better disciplers.
Hmm.
It was assumed, and I think too much of our Christian work is assumed.
Yeah, I would agree, and right, and it overlooks the notion of spiritual giftedness. I think is very important. Now, I think we have to be very careful that we don't just distill it down to a checklist. Oh,
Yes.
I take this test, I get this number, it pops out, and I've got this gift and that gift. It's a useful tool to start you down a road, but I think we caught up in that. There is truth behind it that not everybody is gifted the same way, and Paul talks about it. We like to all think we're the super Christian with all the gifts, right?
Right.
Because who doesn't want to be? You said it, the hero of the story. We want to be that
Yes.
shining example that can do it all, and we can do this with this hand and balance something with our left foot and do it. We can't. We cannot. And we don't all have the same giftedness. I am gifted at teaching, and I've discovered this through my work in the secular world, and it has helped me and carried over into my ministerial world. And it goes back and forth. My comfort in preaching has helped me teach, vice versa, right?
Right.
It's part of how God created me. Um, Not everybody is as comfortable doing that. And I've often said there's a distinction between a pastor and a preacher.
Yes.
I'm much more of a preacher than I am a pastor.
Right.
Because my giftedness is not necessarily in those other areas of counseling and compassion. Not to say that I am a heartless individual. Um, there are days I wonder,
Mhm.
but that's not my strength. My strength is the exhortation. It is the uh, prophecy in the sense of
For,
pulling the word out of.
Forthtelling.
Yes, exactly. Not exactly. And I enjoy that. I get energy from that, and I've said before, I love those aha moments, those light bulb
Yes.
moments. That's where I derive my passion and strength. That lends itself to discipleship. Not all of our preachers or our pastors have that giftedness. So I think when we make an assumption that all of we're kind of falling into this trap of thinking all pastors are the same.
Yeah. We're not.
No.
We all have our own story. Just like you had a journey that brought you into the ministry, I have one as well. Mine, I do think you're right that a lot of our pastors just, should make assumptions, and we need to reach out to the pastors in our community, because I think what we're talking about here is not just discipleship, but spiritual growth,
Hmm.
and you've got to factor that in. And if we're talking about the organism, an organism doesn't grow, is stunted and diseased
Hmm.
and unhealthy, and that's that's the state of our church.
Yeah. And at this moment, something just, I think Spirit just laid something on my heart, and I want to make sure I'm looking at the camera when I say this. I'm talking out there, pastors, if you're hearing this, or church leaders, if you struggle with discipleship, if you struggle with it, it doesn't mean you're failing or that you are a failure, right? We just said everybody's gifted differently. If you're being asked as that single leader in that church to do it all, and this burden of discipleship is falling on your shoulders, and that's not how you're gifted, that is not on you. But I will say then what is important for you is to recognize it and be willing to reach out. That's not a sign of weakness, that's a sign of wisdom.
Yes.
And I think that goes, and that ties into what you've talked about within the message in your conference Beyond the Walls, right? Is understanding where we need the help.
Yes. And that's the hardest part, I think. As pastors, we're put in this position a lot of times. I mean, I know there are big churches with large staffs, but that's not the norm. That's the abnormal church. The normal church in America, at least in the Southern Baptist world, is 50 to 75 members is the average. It's the bulk of the churches across America. Most churches about 75. Some of them may bridge to 150, but most of them don't believe that.
Right.
And if that's the bulk of our church in most of these places, that means you have a single staff pastor, maybe a secondary associate, maybe a secretary. That's the size of it. And what that ends up is that a pastor now has to be an expert in everything.
Yes.
We've got to be facility managers. We've got to be chief counselors. We've got to be chaplains for the hospital. We've got to be able to do work in the prisons. We've got to be able to, oh, by the way, produce a sermon that's quality every single Sunday, at least one, if not two,
Right.
if Sunday night is in
Right.
question. And we have to be available to teach on Wednesday nights.
That's right.
And so wait a minute, we've got to do all that, and that's still not the full total, because we've also got to drive the bus. We've got to make sure that that everything is running. Like if the heat isn't on Sunday morning, they don't call a plumber, they call a pastor. First they may call the plumber, but they're calling the pastor first.
Mm-hmm.
And that puts a lot of pressure on our pastors to do everything. And when you're in that mode where you're the dude making all the answers, doing all the things, answering all the questions, then you get almost in a prideful place where you don't know how to ask
Right.
for help. You don't even know if you can or should.
Right. Because somehow you feel like you failed if you did.
Yeah, because you're supposed to know everything.
Right.
Because they're
Right.
expecting you to know everything.
Yes.
Because that's what they hired you for.
That's right. That's what we're paying you for.
Yeah, you know
which,
everything.
and depending on the salary you get, which mine was,
No pastor is paid what they're worth.
Yeah.
Tell you that.
But it was, that idea of, somehow you're failing. You're letting your congregation down, or you're not. And I don't want to paint all these congregations in a bad light. I'm sure there are many congregations like, well, sure, if you need help, go ask for it. But they don't know. They don't stop. They don't realize there is this blind spot that we've got. And I'd say that's partly the fault of us as church leaders to better educate and help people understand it. But that gets into the discipleship. You've got to be able to move beyond spiritual infancy to accept that.
Yes.
And to know that there are things. And that's why they, in the book of Acts, we saw them creating positions for deacons, for elders, because that's the model, right? They recognized it. And it goes back to the Old Testament.
Moses.
Thank you. Jethro was one of the wisest men around. I love that.
All, Moses.
Oh, I love that passage. Just read it recently, and it's like, Jethro, Moses, what are you doing, man?
Yeah.
Why are you doing this?
That is insane. I was thinking about this as we were talking about looking at our conference we're going to do tomorrow, and I was thinking, there's a basis behind this, and it occurred to me that maybe the idea of reaching outside of our church walls, getting into the community, because most pastors, like myself in particular, I'm a full-time pastor, and so most of my church members are Christians. I'd like to say all of them are, but we know statistically that's not true. But most of our congregants are Christians. Most of my friends are Christians. Most of the people I interact with on a daily basis are Christians for me. And so I don't know a ton of lost people. So the only way that I can get to know them is getting outside the building, going into doing something like substitute teaching or getting outside. And that to me is a one-off. I don't do it every day. You're in the secular world, but you're also bridging into the sacred. I know we already talked about that, but you understand what I'm saying. And I thought, how does that perspective, your perspective, give you a unique opportunity to expose the gaps in discipleship that Sunday morning never really touches?
I think when we're in these jobs, and I'll say I've read a book by Jordan Rayner that talks about this idea of being able to, whatever our jobs are, we need to see that as our calling. And you touched on that earlier.
Vocation is a Latin word, voce, that it means calling. And so your vocation, if it's truly a vocation, not just working at Burger King,
right? Like
I shouldn't say that. If there are people out there that believe that, and God has called them to the vocation of Burger King, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
So please, I'm not trying to put down Burger King. I worked at Burger King as an adult, like not as a teenager. So, but that being said, like if it's a vocation, it's a calling,
right?
And you want to see it that way,
right? and you do what God has created you to do in that space.
Yes.
Right. So if you, as a teacher, for me in a corporate setting to tell people how to use a software, but it could be in a school setting.
Yep.
You could be a nurse. You could be an attorney. You could create software, whatever it is. Are you using the gifts that God gave you, and how do you use them to glorify His creation, His creativity within each of us?
Do all things for
Yes,
God.
and I think within the church setting, we want to gloss over that because there's such an emphasis on, again, I might get pushback, and I don't, right, this idea of the Great Commission being the be all and end all of everything we've been called to do. That didn't even exist as a thing until 1800s.
Yeah.
And this idea that that's
Define what you
the
mean by Great Commission.
so
Because,
the
we know the Great Commission is Matthew 28.
correct.
So you're talking about something else.
Correct. So
tell me
the idea then of yes, beyond what Jesus told us to do in Matthew 20. What I'm talking about is the idea of we've got to go and evangelize everybody,
Yes.
and that's led to this shotgun approach that
Right.
you referenced earlier.
And I love Billy Graham, but he was the master at the shotgun
Yes.
approach. But he, like many other those persuasions, terrible at discipleship.
Right.
He recognized it. He knew he was coming
Yes.
in, and he was going to be the shotgun. He wanted the local churches.
Yes,
to
and
be.
I was part of one of
So
those
was I.
evangelists, and right, they wanted the build up, they wanted the follow up. It never happened, not to the
like
extent.
envisioned.
No, no. And so, but that emphasis on going and making Christians, if you will, through evangelism was a way to sort of get people into the areas of the world where that was needed, China and beyond. But the focus became, it's like if what we were doing in our life didn't somehow relate to spreading the gospel message, then it wasn't worth doing.
Yeah.
And it devalued this idea of honoring God through our work, of just putting those roots down and developing relationship
Training the next generation.
and training the next generation. And I think that is where a lot of that, we became an inch deep and a mile wide.
Yeah. Hyper focus in a certain area, but not focus on what we really should be doing.
Right.
Is raising our spiritual children.
Right.
To maturity. And I think that is a challenge. That does, and I think you see it clearly. You see that gap clearly when you're not in church work.
Mm-hmm.
And so for our non-pastors out there, they understand this probably better than we do. But for those of us that are like myself that are full-time in the church, like I have to get outside this building and get into the community to fully understand the passion that God has for me. Like you gotta love them. You gotta know that they're lost. You gotta understand what that's like. And if you're too far away, you miss it.
Yeah, and I think also it there's a tendency for us to want to sanitize what our faith is supposed to look like.
Yeah.
And Jesus never did it.
No.
His
classroom was outside.
Yes.
He moved from town to town, village to village,
right.
Point. That's where he taught.
Right. We and again, this idea of moving beyond the walls, we've gotten into this model where we just expect the fish to jump into the boat with us.
Yes.
And they're going to come in here and they're going to do it. And our building is going to be this place where it all happens. And at one point, again, this idea, it was one of these places where people would come, your center of gravity.
Yeah.
But that isn't always necessarily true now. And I think even more, not only are they not necessarily a center of gravity, I think we tend to repel people today if we're not careful because of injury and hurt and what is perceived to be hypocrisy, sometimes real, sometimes not. But I think we've become that magnet that doesn't, instead of snapping together, it's pushing apart.
Well, we become polarized.
Yes, and so when and not to go down a political path here, I think I'm very concerned about where I've seen many of the churches again being able to come in as a pulpit fill or an interim, and I see different congregations. We've often conflated our faith with our politics.
Yes.
And that's a dangerous thing.
It is.
And that polarizes us even more. Our nation is polarized enough.
Right.
This should be a place where we come together in unity in Christ.
I believe his passion in the New Testament. I forget which where it's at. It's in one of Paul's letters or maybe one of the apostles' writings for the Gospels. But I seem to remember that we should be lifting Christ up so that all men are drawn to him. And in that whole magnetism sort of way, his message has always been one that draws those that are weak, struggling, and in trouble and turmoil. But we tend to not want any of those. We don't give me your tired, huddled masses, your tattooed, pierced, liberal, crazy, odd. Just give me your normal, um, with a clean cut and an average person that has a good job, that can tithe, that has a family, that doesn't have any problems. And if he does have problems, or she does have problems, they hide them well enough that I don't see them, because I don't want that to happen. Because I don't want you to accidentally infect me
Mhm.
with your sinful
Oh, yeah.
disease. So
Can you tithe? Can you start teaching a Sunday school class?
yeah,
Can you
yeah,
fill in the blank for whatever role that we've got
right.
that you can now go slide in? Right. It takes time to
It does.
build the Christian faith properly. And when we're reaching the people that have never heard the message of Christ, or have heard it but have heard it in a way that was hurtful or was disdainful or wasn't directed, or maybe the message was given in love, but they weren't in a position to hear it
Yeah,
properly, and that's absolutely true. Um, but then when those folks come in and they're hurt and they're broken, it takes time and effort. We
yes,
cannot expect them to be contributing members of our congregation anytime soon.
right.
And that is a burden on
Yeah.
the folks that are here. And we get frustrated with that, right? It's like everybody's got to pull their weight. Yes, but what
Some
weight are
people,
you?
some people have broken legs; they can't do anything.
Well, or when you're an infant, what
Yeah,
weight do you expect them to carry? And but that's just it. We've got these infants, and we're expecting them to carry the load of an adult.
right, right. And we don't teach them right.
Correct.
I was thinking about that. Part of the base of the show, as I mentioned earlier at the beginning, was grounded theology for life. I think part of that grounded theology concept comes from teaching the nuts and bolts of how to exist as humans, as Christians within the church. And I have three sons and a daughter, and I taught all four of my children how to do basic things before they moved out. I taught them all how to change brakes, change a tire, change their oil, sew a button, cook a meal. I mean, I tried to get the basics. There was other things I taught them, but some of those are basic. My daughter actually not only knows how to change your oil in her car, change her tire, or change her brake pads. She also knows how to put on a brand new set of calipers on the front end of a car better than my sons. So, like, I taught my kids these things, and I think if you use that analogy in the church world, like, we're not teaching the grounded nuts and bolts to discipleship. I'll let you talk in a minute. I'm a preacher, right? I'm wordy by nature. It's an occupational hazard.
Mm.
So I had this couple that came into my church not here in Northern Kentucky, one of my other churches, and they moved into the area, joined our church, and they were fairly mature in their own minds, Christians, but they were young in their marriage, and they were still starting out in life, and they wanted to jump right into teaching. But I had a rule. I didn't let anybody start teaching until I got to know them for about a year and a half, because I've been burned by putting people in positions of authority too quickly. And but we needed teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was torn with that. So I decided to go ahead and say, I don't need teachers that badly. I will hold off and wait and let you be part of it. And they got angry at me. Surprise, surprise.
Mm.
And the wife said something to me. Well, we have been discipled. And and she said it three times in the same conversation. And I started to clue in. Like, what do you mean? You've been discipled. They said, well, in our last church, we went through a discipling program. We've done the book. We went through all the classes. And she said, and I have the certificate. She reaches into her
Yes.
purse and pulls out this nice little certificate that looked lovely. It even had a little gold foil emblem
Yes.
on it. And it says that she's been discipled, as though it was a done deal,
Yes.
as though it was finished.
Right. It's like Scott, here's your
Yeah.
diploma.
Yeah.
You're good.
Yeah. And surprise, surprise, they bounced from church to church to church. Um, nobody was able to deal with them. They were very legalistic, fundamental. They eventually decided, I'm not saying fundamentalism is wrong, but their brand of it was not, in my opinion, as biblically minded as necessary. They ended up doing a house church with the only members were their own kids and homeschooled. And they really struggled in the community and in life because they couldn't get past the point to realize they didn't know everything.
Right.
And I wasn't ready for them to teach. I wanted them to just sit and be a church member. Let us get to know you. I'm not saying you can't teach. I'm just gonna say, give me a minute. Give me a minute. And I think that's there we need to have a way to take people once they accept Christ their Savior, we move them into that classroom setting. But it can't be so rigid that they can't transition out because the point of the classroom is to get them into the neighborhood, get them into the job field, get them out in the real world. Like if we don't have a way to bring them from nothing to learning to doing, then we're not that's not discipleship,
Right.
right?
Well, right. And I think now you've hit on something so vitally important. I think when we talk about discipleship, it can't be looked at the standard idea. We talked about it earlier today. We've moved this term of assessment,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. In schools, we no longer test.
Right.
We no longer give exams. We give assessments.
Right. And there's something valid in that.
I like it.
You know,
Sort of.
it depends, but at some point you still need to know that you know information. So whatever term we give it, but this idea, I think we've got to be so careful with discipleship not to boil it down to something like that. You know, in the training world, I'm sure you're familiar with this idea that the Kirkpatrick levels of teaching,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
There's Kirkpatrick level 1, where we give you the true false answers, the ABC, select one. And yeah, so you're doing some sort of assessment, but it really doesn't go much beyond can you regurgitate information that you've been told? And that's where most of our discipleship, when we do it,
That's most of our schooling
stops.
is, and that sucks
Yeah.
because we're producing weak individuals
Yeah.
that don't really know what they're talking about out of the school. But they have a degree, they have a diploma, they have a certificate.
And I think a lot of our discipleship follows suit, right?
Yes.
And so when we've been discipled, it's like, oh, you passed a quiz that said in the book of Acts, how many times was Paul, shipwrecked or whatever it is, pick it. It's like, oh, I can fill in this trivia
Right.
and that's really what it is.
So now I'm a master.
That's correct, right? And so I've been discipled, so I know what I need to do. That is not what Jesus wanted or intended when he says, pick up your cross and follow me. There was no fill in the blank.
Right.
It was, what is your change in your heart? What is the change in your attitude? And that's, if you want to equate it back to those Kirkpatrick levels, that's when you get into that level 4, or even what they call that level 5 of where is the change? How do you apply the things? And we never get there. We know the answers. We know the Sunday school answers, but does it change the way we behave?
Yeah.
Does it change the way we react in the world, in our jobs, outside these walls? And if the answer is no, then, well, it's like James. The demons know who Jesus is.
They do. They know and tremble.
And they tremble.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we've got a lot of Christians, I dare say, that are at demon status but don't have enough sense to tremble in fear.
Right.
And think they're good.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, I think to sum up what we're talking about is that discipleship is not just a transfer of knowledge, it's lived formation.
Yes.
And we're not teaching our people to live and to truly be conformed into the image of Christ like we need to. So I know time is progressing, and I'm looking at the clock and thinking to myself, man, this is probably going to be a 2-parter. I'll have to break it off in the middle or something like that. I don't want to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. I listen to podcasts that are over an hour long. This is already at an hour long. So I know, but good conversation. I don't want it to end. I want it to keep going. So in that light, if you were to have a church, if somebody came and said, Chris, we want you to be the interim fill-in pastor. We've got a pastor that we want to come. He's finishing up his final year at seminary. He's out in Arizona or somewhere else, and he's going to come here. And we know who we have. And we know we got the guy. We know he's good for us. But we want to make sure that we're the best church he can get when he gets here, right? We want to strengthen ourselves so that when our pastor gets here, we can hit the ground running. So if that were to happen, and your only goal in that year was to strengthen discipleship and to get that church ready for their new pastor, where would you start?
I appreciate the softball. That's right. Right. So I did have opportunity to sort of kind of do that, not entirely, but to sort of be an interim pastor, to step into a church that lost their pastor and then in the process of looking for a new one. And one of the things where I would start is understanding who you are as a congregation, as a church.
Yeah.
And that's where I wanted to focus for them is this idea of who are understanding who you are as that local body. Why are you here as a church? Why? And there's sermons I preach with them, and it's, well, why are you here? But the emphasis you put on it is like, why are you here? And then why are you here?
Yes.
Right? There's different ways of looking at it.
Yes.
What is it that God has equipped you as an individual and as a congregation to do? And then why are you in this particular location, this locale? What is it in this community that is needed? What is your purpose in this place? And it may not be the same purpose that it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think we lose that.
Yeah.
And that's where I would want the church to stop and realize, what is your role in your community at this time? Whatever you did 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago may have been great, might have been grand, probably not as great as we would like to think it was, but okay.
We always think the past.
That's right. But it may not be what we're called to do today. God's purposes never change, but his methods do.
Right.
Paul was very clear about that.
He shifted his methods, never his message.
Correct. But as churches, we don't. We tend not to. And part of it is because we are this monolithic building, and it's difficult. We've lost the notion of the tabernacle and become the temple mentality.
The wilderness tabernacle.
Yes. Yes.
Where the people needed to go, rather than that the people came to the building.
Yes.
There was a shift in Israel when they went from a single location to that temple, that moving temple. We talked about that on our Wednesday nights.
Yes.
It seems like this is about focus, right?
Yes.
And we need to get our churches away from that decision-focused model that we are. It's like this needs a decision, crisis mode, answer the decision, move to the next problem, make a decision, move to the next problem, and go to a formation focus. Like, how do we form ourselves? How do we understand who we are, and then conform that into the image of Christ?
And I think that's the notion, and where I wanted to focus with these lovely folks was the idea of your vision and your purpose.
Right.
And ask them to go back and look at that, not the boilerplate piece of paper that everybody can get off of the internet, that, whatever.
You can get a checklist.
Absolutely. But what is it? What is your vision and your purpose? And that's something we can take out of the business world. I think that we could glean and use to our advantage of understanding what it is we're called to do, how we're called to do it. If we feel if your congregation feels that discipleship is one of your core purposes for being, great, but how are you going to do it?
Yeah.
Right. We're great at saying what we want to do, but how do we do it? And look into that idea of how you do it, and really look at that notion of identity, making sure our identity is in Christ, not in ourselves.
Right.
Right. Or not in that past program, or not in the, whatever it is. How are we reflecting Christ? Yes. And really understanding that regardless of who your pastor is, and this struck me too when I was doing this, churches go through this cycle that reminds me of a sine wave. Right. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but I know enough from my younger son.
You do
right?
have a mathematician at the
That's right. That's right. So this idea of where, we peak, we go up, and churches are at their peak, whatever reason the pastor leaves is no longer, or leadership change, and we drop, right? We go back down. And it's this process, this sine wave that you look at. And my goal was, how do you flatten that wave?
Yeah.
So that when there's a leadership change, ideally that would be great, right? But normally, if there's a leadership change, you're probably going to have some drop off. How do you minimize that?
It shouldn't be a massive
Correct.
trough. It shouldn't go crest to trough.
That's right.
Trough. It should be a ripple.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
How and that happens when the church is aware of its own identity.
Right.
So it's not tied up that when the pastor arrives, the church adapts and becomes whatever the pastor thinks.
And it's a Christian, focused on little.
Correct. Christ. And you're successful as long as that person is leading the charge. And when they're gone, then you don't know what you do, and we flounder. That is where I would want them to focus, is understanding your purpose, your vision. Why do you exist as a congregation within this community, and how do you fit? And understanding that role doesn't change simply because the name of the person who is your pastor does.
Right. I love that idea. I really do. And I know we could probably talk more. We're about to have you come on and talk some more, but I do want to kind of end this a little bit. So we got but before we do that, I thought maybe that we could give you could give, if you don't mind, a little encouragement for any pastors or leaders that might be watching this episode.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they've gotten this far. They might have tuned us out. Like,
TLDR, too long didn't read, or
yeah.
TLDW,
So whatever. Yeah.
too long didn't watch.
But I know there's a lot of pastors and leaders that feel like that they may have inherited a mess,
Mm.
that they're stepping in a church, and it's a mess they didn't create, but now they're suddenly being the ones that have to clean it all up. What encouragement can you give those kind of pastors or leaders? It doesn't have to be a pastor. Any leader in the
Right.
organization.
I want to say you're not alone.
Yes.
And
Even though you may think you are,
that's right.
you are not alone.
You're not alone. I mean, all right, I'm going to give, and it's going to sound like a trite answer, and I don't mean it to. Obviously, you're not alone because God is always walking beside us, and we cannot overlook that, and that is huge. But even beyond it, in the practical, in the day-to-day, you're not alone, right? Within our Baptist world, there is this thing, the Northern Kentucky Baptist Association.
Right.
Reach out to them, ask them. And beyond that, take the initiative. You know what? Call that church down the street.
Yes.
Cultivate relationships.
They're not the enemy.
That's right. They're not. They're not the bad guys.
We have an enemy, and he's a lot bigger, more powerful.
That's
we don't
right.
have to make new enemies.
That's right. We don't have to. We'd have to eat ourselves from within.
Yes.
Cultivate relationships with other pastors. And it could be through the NKBA. Could be, and it's okay if the other pastor isn't a Baptist.
Yes.
Am I allowed to say that?
Yes, you can have friends that are Baptist.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Cultivate those relationships. Understand what that is. Create an ecumenical council in your own community.
Well,
Reach out and talk. Now, we want to make sure they're scriptural based, gospel sound bodies, but understand you're not alone. And reach out and develop that. And then if nothing else, you to call an association, develop those relationships, and just know you're not fighting this fight alone. There are people that will help you and are here.
So on that same line, for our leaders that might be watching this, and again, I say leaders because it could be, I mean, these principles aren't confined to the church. They're confined to any organization that seeks and desires to advance self and grow like we do. We want to see the kingdom of God grow. So what does faithfulness look like when growth feels slow and unglamorous?
It feel I think in a way it might feel what Moses felt.
Yeah.
Right. And I've always felt for Moses. He had to put up with one of the worst congregations ever. I mean, the week out of being delivered, and they're grumbling because they don't have enough food. And why didn't we left the spa resort of Egypt? That's right. It's much better. We had food every day. And
it was horrible food. And,
that's right.
And we had to build everything, and we had chains, but but it was food.
And it was food. And then God tells Moses how to build the tabernacle, and Moses goes to walk in the tabernacle, and God says, nope.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to go in. And then the promised land, right? We get to the promised land, and because his knucklehead congregation, he hits the rock with his staff when God told him not to.
He was frustrated.
And God says,
I've been there.
Yeah, nope, you're not going in the promised land. You can look at it, but you're not allowed to go in. Now, Moses got to walk with God in ways that nobody else ever could. But to me, you asked my question, I think it might look like that.
Yeah.
It's that idea of you just keep putting that one foot in front of the other, not in a sense of it's a grind and I'm going to wear myself down, but you keep going forward in faithfulness day by day, knowing as you're walking with God, and you may face those frustrations. You may not reach. And we kind of talked about this earlier for you even, right? Your journey has led you to places where you don't always get to see what grew out of that because God has moved you from place to place. And I think it's that faithful endurance, but not letting it become the burnout, the grinding to where there's nothing left.
Yeah. I think if I were to give encouragement to any of our leaders and pastors out there, so I know some of you guys have been watching the show for a while. You might know that a little of my history. I've been doing ministry now almost 30 years, and I've been a senior pastor in 4 different churches, 4 or 5 churches, associate pastor in 3 others. So I've seen a variety of places and a variety of different contexts. And as a senior pastor, when I started that journey, I've been full-time as a senior pastor straight on. If I was going to give my encouragement to the local pastor, leader in a church, we're talking about Moses, I would say find your Aaron and her.
Yes.
That's H-U-R, not H-E-R. Hopefully your H-E-R is your wife.
That's right.
But your H-U-R is the other guy that's on your left side holding your arm up while your brother Aaron is holding your right arm.
Yes.
If you don't have an Aaron and a Hur in your ministry, you need to find a different ministry
Yeah.
or find your Aaron and Hur
Yeah.
because you cannot do it. You have to have people holding your arms up. If you don't have it, you will burn out and you'll do more damage to your ministry and your kingdom and your marriage and your life than than just stepping back and going becoming a plumber.
Yeah.
I'd say become a plumber. If you don't have Aaron and Hur, become a plumber.
Well, and I'm not going to lie, part of that led into my decision not to pursue another full-time ministry position after I left,
Yeah.
where I did. Uh, I didn't, I've said that it would take almost the literal finger of God coming down and writing on a wall saying, Chris, go pastor this church in order for me to do that. Um, and I feel that was the right decision for me. I'm not saying
Yes.
other pastors that would, but for me, because it put me in that position long enough to have sympathy, understanding, be able to speak into it and know it, but then be in a position where I can now speak into congregations without worrying about it. And like I said, it's been freeing. I've had more opportunities to be in more churches than being a senior pastor of one place.
Yeah.
And it is, yeah, it is so and so important to have somebody
So
with
going
that.
back to that last question,
Yes.
is in light of all that. So why do you still believe that the local church is worth fighting for?
Because it is still the embodiment of Christ's body. And in all of these places where we go, when we're doing it right, when we're doing it properly, each of these congregations is part of that larger body.
It looks beautiful.
And it does. And it when the churches come together and we see this working and the unity that comes across, it is gorgeous and it's beautiful. And that is the picture, the bride of Christ
Yes.
that scripture gives us. It is that harmony of the message of the gospel.
Right.
And that's worth fighting for. It's worth dying for.
Yeah.
And that's, and when I say dying, laying our life down, yes, but not only that, dying to self, right? And putting those things aside. And you know, I've often, when I've done some counseling, I've asked the question, are you willing to die for your spouse? Are you willing?
Yes.
And then the answer is yes. Oh, sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. I do. I jump in front of a truck, whatever. Then the next question is this: are you willing to live for them?
Yeah.
Are you willing sacrificially live for them? So do you set what your desires aside, so you now live for them, and that local body of Christ is worth doing that. It's worth setting aside the conveniences and those things because that's where Christ lives in those bodies. I don't care if it's 5 people, 50 people, 500 people, where 2 or more gathered, and that's worth doing right.
Leaders, pastors. Like this conference we're doing tomorrow is just one of hopefully many we'll do. Because my goal is not to do a conference. My goal is to see the kingdom of God strong and moving forward, growing the way He intended when He left the earth.
Yes.
2,000 plus years ago. I want to see the church grow. So if churches took discipleship seriously, I mean, really seriously, like we said, this is going to be our focus. What do you think would change in our communities? Maybe, I want to say 5 or 10 years from now, but we just say 2 years from now. If we, as a church, took discipleship seriously, how would our communities look in a year, 2 years from
I think you'd see much greater return to civility, right? Because what did Jesus say? We love our neighbors.
now? Yes.
We are to love one another. When they were trying to trap him, it's like, oh, what's the greatest commandment? Well, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, body, and soul. Is the first. Yep. And the second is just unto it, love your neighbor. Yeah. And of course, then we tried to get out. Well, who's my neighbor? Who isn't?
All of them.
Who isn't?
Everyone.
Right. And when we take that to heart, when that's the heart of our discipleship, and we take that seriously, then the nonsense we see in our politics and in our conversations that spill over and beyond, that starts to be flavored by our relationship with Christ.
Yeah.
And we realize they're not the enemy either. Just because you have so we talked about the other church, they're not the enemy. Well, just because you're a Democrat and I'm a Republican or vice versa or whatever, doesn't make you the enemy. Yeah. We've got to be able to look past that and understand that when we're Christians, we're all part of God's family. Yeah. And when we treat each other that way and start having that, and then when we see the lost people who don't have that, why is somebody going to want to step into the mess if we can't even get along with ourselves?
Right. We need to step past the politics into the presence of God.
Yes.
and everything.
And it's not just politics,
No,
by
I
the way.
know.
That's a big one, but
It is, but
it's
if we could step past the politics, past the garbage, and into the presence of God, and as a group, it's just a more powerful place.
yes.
I'd rather be there.
Yes, and that I think that's what we would see. We would see that return to the ability to have civility, discourse, and a change in our heart and our
Yeah,
attitudes. And then, and here's the ironic thing, Al, the things that we clamor for that we want to change through our politics, we wouldn't need to worry about it
yeah,
because we've changed the hearts of the people.
that's it. Yeah. I've often wanted to go back to those simple times, because I live in nostalgia just like everybody else. The days of apple pie and the community, and I remember as a young person watching television. Of course, when you and I were growing up, we only had three networks and PBS. We didn't have Fox. We just had ABC, NBC,
I was a big thing
and
when 19
CBS.
got to, oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I do remember when we first got our first Fox channel. It was like,
Hmm.
oh my gosh, the fourth network, and it's so cool. It was the cool one. At least it was in Florida where I was growing up. But and look, I remember watching some of those older movies and shows that we would see, like every Sunday night. There'd be the Disney family movie that would come
Hmm.
out, and you'd see those Pollyanna moments. And you'd see the town community gather together on the 4th of July, and they're all wearing their good clothes, and they're eating chicken and watermelon and fireworks, and they're just enjoying it. They're all on these picnics, and like we don't do that as a community, as a culture anymore. We don't have that. I know we're missing a lot of those things, and maybe instead of looking back to those Pollyanna moments, to those moments, maybe we ought to look beyond that and go back to the idea of loving your neighbors, because
Yes.
that's what that represented,
Yeah.
was a true caring for the neighbor. And if we don't have that, we don't have anything. And you're
Yeah.
right. I think true discipleship leads us back to the two commandments: love your neighbor.
Yep.
I'm not doing,
Yep.
doing either one of them.
Not like we should.
All right. Any last thoughts?
Oh, I appreciate. Thank you so much. It's like I said, I could just keep talking,
We
doing this
could.
for hours,
We
and
could.
I enjoy it. Thank you. If you've made it this far, God bless you.
Yes, you're a saint.
That's right. And yep, you've earned a star in your crown. And thank you for listening to Al. And again, just want to encourage you and yeah, reach out, take us up on it. I would love to be able to help encourage and support
Yeah.
our pastors and leaders.
I think that's the goal. And as we move on, we're getting ready to close this out. I want to thank everybody for watching. If anything we've said here is connecting with you, a lot of times I talk about things that are a little more trauma, a little more grief, a little more how to nuts and bolts kind of stuff. I think we talked a lot of nuts and bolts on leadership and church dynamics that I think has value, even if
Hmm.
you're not a church leader or a pastor. But if you're watching this, you're not a church leader, you're not a pastor, maybe something we've said resonates, and maybe you need to send this link to your pastor, not as a judgment,
Right.
but as an encouragement,
Right. Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so we want whatever it is, send the link. I encourage you to please subscribe and like this, and maybe share this video. And beyond that, I just want to encourage you to come back next week as we explore other topics. I'm not exactly sure what it's going to be next week, but we'll put something together, I am sure. But again, I want to thank you so much for joining us with Grace, Grit, and Grounds. And just remember to keep the coffee hot, keep the conversation flowing, and just remember that grace builds what grit sustains. Thank you again for coming. We'll see you next week.
God bless.